Good evening. We are now moving into our 11th lesson in Adeptship. And this lesson is called Taking Care of Our Four Lower Bodies. We talked about how we have four lower bodies: our etheric body, mental body, emotional body, and physical body. Each of these bodies is actually looked after by an elemental. An elemental looks after these bodies. Our mental body is looked after by a sylph. Our etheric body is looked after by a salamander. Our emotional body is looked after by an undine, and our physical body is looked after by a gnome, or one called the body elemental. So we want to look after these vehicles because they are our transportation, the transportation of our soul in this plane. They're also a gift from God, and we know that in the Bible it says that our body is the temple of God. So we don't want to take it for granted, and we do have to be careful with how we look after it. And so there are certain things that can be helpful to the body and other things that can be very detrimental to the body. A lot of people, especially in the West, pay special attention to the care of the physical body, and we know that includes diet and exercise and good sleep and all of those things. What I would say here is, when it comes to diet, I have seen many fads and many phases that people have gotten into to try to do what's best for their body. And I think that we go through phases, and each phase can have different benefits. I have seen how, for example, in the students of the Ascended Masters, there were phases that were raw food, there were phases that were vegan, there were phases that were vegetarian, there were phases that were macrobiotic, there were phases where meat was reintroduced for strengthening. And so there are a lot of different phases. One of the things that the Masters definitely encourage people not to do is not eat sugar, avoid sugar as much as possible. But that being said, the Masters also do not want us to become completely fanatic. And so I happen to have experiences with Mother where she had us eat some things that you wouldn't consider the healthiest, like ice cream, you know? And it helped me to understand that, especially as a mother with children and all that, you can't be fanatic. Jesus said, what comes out of your mouth is far more important than what goes into your mouth, meaning that we have to watch our words, our deed, our consciousness, even more so than to be fanatic about what goes into the body. I think a lot of people can get hung up on that in the spiritual path. It's not necessarily a good thing. They can become idolatrous of the health of their body and of the way that they are treating their body and what they believe is the right way for that. Remember the teaching that Jesus told Peter, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And there were restrictions in the dietary law of Judaism, in the kosher diet, where there were certain things that Peter wouldn't eat because they were not prepared in a kosher way and all of that. And Jesus was saying, you're teaching to the Gentiles and you have to be more flexible now. So I'm explaining these things to you because ultimately, if we bless our food, if we charge it with violet fire, if we charge it, we can accelerate regardless. The Master Saint Germain, when he was the Count Saint Germain in Europe, in the time when he wrote the Holy Trinisophia, he would eat chicken, it says. He would eat a little bit of chicken. He didn't eat much, but he ate a little bit of chicken. Well, some people would say, oh my goodness, that means he wasn't vegetarian. Then the students of the I Am movement come around, sponsored by Saint Germain in the 1930s, and they are complete vegetarians. And that is because the teaching that meat registers fear, which it does. The animal registers fear, especially if it's a larger animal. Again, that can be transmuted. In the Summit Lighthouse, Elmore said if you eat meat, you have to transmute it, do more violet flame. And so I have seen all kinds of variations along the way when it comes to diet, when it comes to fasting. Fasting is important. That is one of the things the Masters have asked us to do again and again, and it's in all of the spiritual traditions to fast and pray. But if you fast, you want to do it in a way that you can handle it, because it can dislodge entities and all of that in your aura, and you should never fast more than 3 days in a row, because it becomes unbalancing. So where you live will also have an impact on how yang or dense the diet needs to be based on the Eastern system. If you're in a cold country, you're more likely going to want to eat some kind of soup, broth, etc. If you're in tropical country or warm countries, you might want to be fine with just fruits. So all these things have to be taken into consideration, as well as the age of the person, allergies, and everything else. There was a teaching that I found helpful called Eat Right for Your Blood Type. I think there's validity to that. But again, we can transmute things. We can bless our food. We can make it so that we are not completely dependent on our ideation when it comes to food. My great-grandfather, I was told, would say, we don't live to eat, we eat to live. And I think that's the most important thing that we remember. So we do want to take care of our body. The Masters do not recommend or sponsor in any way alcohol, especially drinking alcohol. I mean, a little homeopathic remedy is okay, Bach flower remedy, but talking about drinking for entertainment. Alcohol cuts us off from the mighty I Am Presence. It is a spirit, and there's an entity called spiritus that comes with alcohol. Also, same with tobacco, drugs, very highly discouraged. Marijuana especially is absolutely a drug that will take you away from the path of the ascension, the path of the teachings, the path of your Christ self. It's a terrible detriment, and now that it's legal here in the United States and a lot of states, it's very important to express how dangerous marijuana is to your spiritual integrity, because it literally kills your drive to get things done. And we have to have a strong drive to fulfill our divine plan. We have to have some wind in our sails, and the marijuana takes that away, along with all these other things that it does to the brain and to our willpower. So we really want to stay away from that. And then as far as our mental body is concerned and our emotional body are concerned, I would add to these things, we have to refrain from a lot of the dark or destructive forces that play out in the entertainment industry, in the movies, and in the music, or so-called music. There are tremendously dark forces that pile up on rap music, rock music, heavy metal, etc. Also, there are tremendous forces of darkness that come in based on the darkness that is in certain forms of advertisement and children's cartoons, TV programs, and so forth, that flash a lot of violence, sexual content, and are simply not anything that the Masters would want you or a child to sit in front of. We have to understand that Jesus told us that everything that we watch sticks for at least several weeks in our subconscious as if we had lived it. So if you start watching a movie every night, then you're processing that. I have found that as I accelerate on the path, I process everyone and everything I look at, even in the news, even for a short period of time. And so every figure 8 flow with everyone becomes a cost or a burden unless it's transmuted. You see, either if you have more light, you give your light to others, though we do make the call that we don't give that light unlawfully as much as possible. That's why, again, we invoke Archangel Michael. But if otherwise, people tend to want to receive light from others. So there's the lawful dharma, and then there's the bringing into our life of people who will steal our light, and we have to be very careful with that. Also, this includes with sexual relationships, because we are literally figure 8 flowing with people when that is going on, and we are taking on the exchange at the level of the electronic belt. Now, marriage is a consecration, which means that the causal bodies, the mighty I Am Presence, the Christ Self, are involved in the consecration of the union. When there isn't the vow of marriage, the union is basically far more of a meshing of electronic belts. But again, we're in a situation, in a time, in an economy where we have to not be fanatic about any of these things. We understand the general teaching. This is really about being able to become the spirit of the law rather than to get completely hung up on the letter of the law. That's very important also. And even as that is important, that does not justify then flaunting the law or not fulfilling the law, is what I'm saying. All of the rock music and the rap music and the popular culture. Sanat Kumara gave us the call that we can call in the name I Am That I Am, in the name Brahman, for the removal from the youth of the world, first and foremost, and then from everyone, of the rock music, the rap music, and all of the rest, including the drug culture. And the drug culture can even be an abuse of pharmaceuticals. I was telling a friend the other day that when they have fished and caught up fish from the various oceans now in the United States, they have found that a lot of fish carry antidepressant and other drugs in their system. So the ecosystem is literally carrying some of these drugs, and these are not good for us in some ways. I mean, they may be a stopgap measure for a while, but we have to be very careful, because a lot of these drugs will ultimately make it so it's a lot harder for us to connect to our Christ self. They do something to the pineal gland. They densify it, calcify it, and shut down our ability to really have that connection with the higher self, which is the only thing that will ultimately free us from depression. So I am explaining these things so that you can be careful. Be careful with what you listen to, be careful with what you ingest. These things will affect your chakras, they will affect your mental body, your emotional body. Be careful who you tie yourself to. Be careful who you sleep with. Be careful who your friends are. You want a like-minded community of people. And these things are just as important as the food you eat. So just remember that what you take in is what you become. Who you hang out with is who you will be like. And choose wisely for those who will edify you. And then when it comes to food and everything else, find what works for you in a given cycle and do the best you can to keep your body energized and happy. Another important point for the 4 lower bodies is the daily decrees. We have to daily invoke the light, with mantras and some songs, but most especially the science of the spoken word. We have to invoke that flame to accelerate ourselves. So these are some of the cares of the 4 lower bodies that I wanted to speak of. The care also of cleanliness, cleanliness being godliness, cleanliness, order, as much as possible, so that when you are in an environment, your mind, your body, your 4 lower bodies can be at a greater peace, the peace that comes with order. Mother Kaspari used to say that it was very important for children in their early years to be surrounded with order, discipline, and a place for everything in its right place. Otherwise, chaos comes into our consciousness and life. We become accustomed to chaos, and chaos is the antithesis of the light. Chaos is what happened before God drew out of chaos the formed. So we want to avoid chaos and the forces of chaos that are really anti-creation, and bring forth the true co-creativity with God that will nurture our four lower bodies also and bring us home. So those are my thoughts on the caring of the four lower bodies and the chakras. Be careful what you watch, be careful what you eat, be careful what you drink, be careful about not smoking, be careful who you hang out with, be careful who you have sexual relations with, be careful what you listen to, be careful what you watch, and make sure you get your decrees in along with your meditations each day. And make sure you draw nigh to God, for God says, draw nigh to me, I will draw nigh to thee. In Jesus' name, amen.